This is the Commonwealth, where we talk with the unique people blazing their own trail. Last week, we mentioned that the Commonwealth is now a part of the Hurrdat Media network. I have also accepted a full-time job at Hurrdat and am in charge of growing each show in their podcast network. Our guest today is Jill Thomas. Jill is the co-host of one of the biggest podcasts in Hurrdat's media network, The Pat and JT Show. We asked Jill about starting her radio career alongside Glenn Beck, becoming one of the biggest radio personas in all of Omaha, then starting and selling a podcast business. Enjoy the conversation. Okay, Jill. So I think of you as the director of podcasting for Hurrdat and like someone I work closely with. I don't think of you as the famous radio personality that you were. That someone came in to the studio a couple days ago and asked to take a picture with you, and I'm sitting there and I overheard the comment. I was like, "Why would you want a picture with Jill?" Oh, she was a famous radio personality. So you are the director of podcasting for Hurrdat. But before getting into podcasting, I'm curious how you got into radio.
Oh, wow. I haven't told that story in a long time.
Yeah.
Haven't really thought about it in a long time. I've been in radio a long time. Is the reason why. I guess it all started years ago. I was in showed horses and rodeos and things like that.
Okay.
And
here in Nebraska? Okay.
Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, regionally.
Okay.
And then when I went to college, I ended up at Arizona State. And I was there for about a year, and then I realized I need my horses. And so I found a place to board my horses.
In Arizona?
In Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. And then I had my horses, so then I started getting involved in stuff that was going on in Phoenix horse-related. I like judging shows. I like helping kids learn how to ride, et cetera. Those are the kind of things that I fell back into.
Okay.
And
I was a 4-H kid.
Were you?
Yes, yeah.
So there you go.
Yes.
Can you understand?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like once the 4-H thing was like huge for me when I was growing up. That was everything to me. And it was like I didn't do after school stuff because I had to go home and ride my horses and get ready, and it was a year-round job. And
yes,
that was
of
just
course.
it. So, and I judged 4-H shows for like 25 years, horse shows, up to regional, like districts. I didn't judge state, but I judged up to districts.
Okay.
A lot of county fairs.
I can believe it.
And anyway, I took the horses down there, and so then I started getting involved in stuff down there. And then I was introduced, I entered a rodeo that was in that area, and they had the Turquoise Circuit, which is Arizona, New Mexico, for the PRCA. And I entered one of the smaller rodeos that was down there, and that just snowballed. And so I started meeting people and how things go. And I met some people that were with a couple organizations that were with the Phoenix Rodeo at the time.
And were you going to school?
I was going to college at the time too. Yeah, I hadn't quit yet. I finally did get misdirected. I don't know. That's how I ended up where I'm at now.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I ran for the queen of the Phoenix Rodeo.
Okay.
To be queen. And the way Phoenix had it set up, it was the Phoenix JC's rodeos of rodeos. It was a huge rodeo. I think it was like one of the top 20 rodeos in the country, and huge indoor rodeo. And they had a court. So you had the queen, you had the lady in waiting, and then you had the attendants.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was a system to things. It was an old girls club as opposed to the old boys club. You had to work your way up.
Yeah.
And so I won attendant the first year, actually a tie. So me and another girl, Maria was her name, we were co-attendants, so to speak. So we followed the queen all over the place. And the queen and I became really good friends.
Okay.
And we still are to this day. But anyway, the next year I won lady in waiting, and then the girl who was queen that year quit halfway through. So I became queen, and I was queen for 2 years. And then when it was finally wrapping up, and so as queen, you traveled to rodeos all over the western part of the country as an ambassador, basically. So you would go there, you're promoting your rodeo and inviting people to come to your PRCA rodeo.
Yes.
So
Very similar to pageants is what it reminds me of.
It kind of is, because we go to, I do interviews, I was on television shows, I was in parades, you name it. I was emceeing things as the queen of the Phoenix JC's Rodeo of Rodeos. And so my final interview was with a guy named W. Stephen Martin. He was the morning guy at a radio station, KNIX, in Phoenix, country station. And he'd been there forever. He was like baked in. I mean, you couldn't have Phoenix radio without W. Stephen. And he interviewed me on his show, and one of his last questions was, "What are you going to do now?" Because I was going to have to give up my crown. Now, at that point, I'd quit school.
Okay.
And because I was traveling so much, I couldn't do both. And so he said, "Are you going to go back to school, or what's the plan?" And I'm like, I had thoughts of maybe going to work for one of the sponsors, because they have some major sponsors for the PRCA, in promotions or doing something like that. I really enjoyed that. And I'd kind of looked into that, but I had nothing definitive.
Yes, yeah.
And so he, off the air, then said, "You should look into going in broadcasting." He said, "You really should." He said, you do a good job." And I was like, "Do you make money doing that?" I didn't know, because I'm thinking I would volunteer because this is fun, to be on the radio. And so he hooked me up with some people that he knew in town. There was a broadcasting school. And the cool part was that all the instructors worked in radio in Phoenix. So you were automatically networking. I didn't realize the benefit of that when I did it.
Yes, yeah.
And I also didn't realize the difference between a university broadcasting program and going to a broadcasting school, right?
And what is the difference?
Most of the people that work in the university broadcasting programs don't work in radio, and some never have. Some are very good in their field, but as for applied practice, they really hadn't done it. And most of the universities have phenomenal studios, which most radio stations don't. Most radio stations are on a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
And you will work that you'll have your control board or whatever you're using, any equipment, until it dies, and then we'll have the engineer come in and resuscitate it. We're not getting a new one. So unless you had some kind of an angel contributor that was going to help you fund your radio station, it was really hard. And so when you go to a radio station, most of the time the equipment is not top notch. So a lot of people that come out of university systems and come in to work at a radio station, we've had plenty of interns, they're floored by, "Well, this isn't the equipment we have." I know, don't rub it in. And so that's how I got hooked up with the school. And the first 2 weeks, I got an internship. And I was working for a top 40 morning show that was brand new at KOY, which was Y95 in Phoenix. And they had brought in, Tim Hattrick was a longtime Phoenix player in the radio world, and a new guy named Glenn Beck. And they were putting them together as a new morning team. And
so Glenn Beck was out of Phoenix when he started.
Glenn Beck actually
the
started
Glenn Beck is who we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
He actually started in the Northwest when he was about 12 or 13. The story goes, he had a Saturday show. And so at the end of his show, he'd have his sign off was, "You can come pick me up. Hey, Mom, you can come pick me up now."
That's a good sign off. I like that.
That was his sign off. So then his mom would come pick him up. But he worked at several other major markets, working his way up, and had been in radio for probably 10, 12 years when I was just starting.
Okay.
And so he's 2 years younger than me. And so he already had massive experience.
Yeah.
And I was 22 or 23 at that time when I started.
So you were working closely with Glenn Beck.
I was his producer for their morning show.
Okay. How different was his on-air persona as opposed to off-air?
He was
the same.
He and I'll tell you, the thing is when I met him, and if people know his story, and I don't know it intimately, I just know when I worked with him, he was an open book. But he was a young person who was making a lot of money, and he had a family, but it did like it does to most people. There were no limitations, and he was a local celeb. So a lot of doors opened up for him.
Of course.
And his story, the way the story goes, I guess in the 90s is when he started a decline, and he dropped out of radio, and there was some other issues that were going on as well, and unfortunately his marriage broke up, and then he went to a theology school, and he got into politics, and just like thirst for this information, and that's where his kickstart, I guess, a reboot. So he was top 40, and he was wildly creative. He still does incorporate some of that into his program. And he went away from it for a while, when he first started coming back, and he was just a different person. But I think he was still trying to find his way. And it's interesting to see how he's evolved.
Yes,
it really
yeah.
is.
So your first job was producing his show.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And was that a natural segue from the rodeo world?
It's funny. I think that the thing that it prepared me for doing that stuff, doing the Queenie stuff and doing that pageant stuff is that you had to meet a lot of new people, and you just had to figure it out as you went and readjust for each personality a little bit. I learned a lot from those guys working as their producer, interview skills as being the interviewer instead of interviewee.
Okay. What were some?
Yeah. The biggest thing is just to listen, like you just did. Because you had a question pop in your head and you asked it.
Yeah.
As opposed to having a line of questions and just letting somebody answer the question, then going on to the next question, the follow-up. And that's where I think a lot of, I don't want to, journalists, I don't know, but a lot of people, they miss that step because they want to be sure and ask these questions, A, B, C, and D, and they may miss that follow-up that might take them in a completely different direction. These questions won't mean anything now, but they'll find out something that maybe nobody's ever asked them before, or nobody's ever asked of that person before. And don't be afraid of the follow-up. Don't worry about getting to your questions, and just to let things kind of breathe.
Yes, yeah. So then what was the journey from that role producing Glenn Beck show to hosting Pat and JT in the morning in Omaha? And that show out of Omaha was syndicated throughout the Midwest, or syndicated other areas?
We tried. We didn't. Okay. But we ended up, though, our show, it covers a large area because the station that we were on covers from, as far as regionally, it goes from Des Moines to Grand Island, Sioux City to Kansas City, or just north of Kansas City.
Okay.
They couldn't get us in Kansas City, but they could get us in Sioux City. So it was a big area.
Yes, yeah.
That it covered. It got into Kansas a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
It was a big area. But that from producing, then I ended up getting an overnight gig at a heavy metal station, and I was assistant promotions director, and they had another station that was a classic country station.
Okay.
They were right next door to their two studios are right next to each other. So you had classic country over here. You're listening to, name it, I don't know.
Shania Twain, like old.
Like 50s, 60s.
Oh, okay. It's funny how different our
classic.
Yes, yeah.
You know what's so funny is we were talking about that the other day. Is that music? There's a lot of music that doesn't get played on the radio anymore. 80s hair band music is like something there's not a station that really pulls it, that plays it. But it's funny is in the 80s, classic music was considered 20 years old. So you go back to the 60s, maybe 50s and 60s. But you go ahead 20 years, classic music still is in the 50s and 60s. If you're looking at classic music, it's like classic country might come up to the 70s, 60s and 70s, but it's just this weird area in the 80s that, you don't know what to do with. It's kind of crazy because like country music in the 80s was very middle of the road. Kenny Rogers type, it could get played on a pop station sometimes.
Okay.
Islands in the Stream made it into the pop world with Dolly Parton and Kenny, right?
Okay, yeah.
But then you have your real hardcore country sounds. Trace Adkins would be one now that's a good country sound. Brooks and Dunn is another one that, is more of a classic sound. But anyway, they had the classic country, so I was doing a shift on the classic country station, and I was doing a shift on the heavy metal station.
Okay.
And that's where I got to meet Alice Cooper, which was cool because he lived just north in Paradise Valley.
Wow.
And so he would come into the station frequently. And so I got to meet him, and I got some pictures with him. And the station was wildly successful. So it was like I had no idea how good I had it.
Yes, yeah. What kind of persona did Alex Cooper have when he walked in?
Super nice, very smart, very well spoken. He's interesting as all get out. Then you see him on stage. It was totally the opposite of what I was expecting because I just had the picture in my mind of the guy on the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he is like on the. I think he was on. I don't know. He was PTA. He's real involved in his community.
Okay.
He do fundraisers, and he was, he has a program that he does a lot of fundraisers, golf tournaments, etc., raising money to help children that don't have access to the arts have a place to go where they can learn about music, whether it's instruments or singing or all this other stuff. And he has quite the program. And so he has a pretty big footprint in Phoenix.
Okay.
Definitely.
And did you find hosting challenging compared to producing, or was that again just like a?
Yeah, producing. I like producing because I think I like hosting. I like them both. I like producing though because I've always thought of myself. I guess my personality is I'm a good wingman. It's like I can help somebody. I can see what they're going to need, and I like being that person to making sure that somebody else can do their job to their best ability. So that's kind of like what your producer is constantly doing. And they're watching and taking cues, like paying attention to what's being talked about. Maybe they need something. Maybe you know about an article that you saw that they should see it because they're talking about a particular topic, or you know that they need something technically. And so you need to get that taken care of, but not interrupt them, and just kind of you don't want to be the show. You want to be the fly on the wall, but make sure everything gets taken care of and not interrupt.
Yes.
So I like doing that part. But I like the hosting side of it too. I want to think after I did that, then I ended up coming back to Nebraska and had a job for a short while at WW, which was at the time flagship country station for years.
In Omaha?
It was in Omaha.
Okay.
And then I went to work at Froggy, which was in Lincoln.
Yes.
And that was when it was just a startup. And so that was really fun because that was the first time I was involved with a brand new radio station and bringing it online, which was a lot of fun.
Yes. What challenges come with starting a new radio station?
Yeah.
Is it like your classic startup that?
Yeah.
Yes.
You want people to know you're there. And the way Froggy did it is they had a billboard campaign. First, it was just yellow billboards with nothing on them. And then it was a black outline that, as it turned out, was the face of a frog.
Oh, okay.
And then was green. And so it caused talk because they would see these billboards. It was really an ingenious little idea. And then eventually it had Froggy and it had the dial position.
Okay.
Was on it. So all we had was a morning show, and that was my first. Yeah, that was my first time in mornings, straight as a host. So I was with John Taylor, and I were brought together. We did not know each other, and they asked us to come in and see if we would make a team and how it would work, and we did. We did good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then what's the story of connecting with Pat for your co-host on the
that
radio
was another
show?
one too. We didn't know each other either at all, which is it's like catching lightning in a bottle, so to speak. Because honestly, I don't know that we were necessarily brought together to succeed because the radio station was in transition that we came to.
And were you still at Froggy, or had you moved on to a different
I had
station?
moved on. I actually was in an ownership position, and with a group, there was 4 of us. Then we owned 2 radio stations in central Nebraska.
Okay.
So I got the ownership's taste, too. I got a little bit of that as well.
Yes, yeah, hitting all roles.
Yeah. I got to do payroll.
Yeah.
That was not fun. And billing, but then I also did like a little Party Line was the name of the show. Buy, sell, trade, giveaway, looking for items lost and found, birthdays and anniversaries.
Okay.
6 days a week, and had no producer. So I had to do everything because we were small town radio.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another learning experience.
Yes.
And then I was trying to get back to Omaha because my family's in this area.
Okay.
And so somebody I'd worked with at Froggy was working in Omaha at the station. And he knew that they were looking for somebody to come in because they didn't have a morning show at the time. And another guy in the station knew Pat. And Pat was from this area, and Pat was working in Tulsa at the time. And so they asked us to come up. So we came in the overnight hours. We both drove. So he came up from Tulsa, stayed with his folks. I drove in. I was in Hastings.
Mm-hmm.
And we did like 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night together. It was the first time we'd ever met. We didn't even meet in the daytime. I mean, the first time it was like, this is the person we want you to work with, but we want to try you guys out first. Neither one of us had been hired.
Okay, so they tested it out in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
When, the radio viewership drops. Is
Yeah,
that just the logic?
it was,
just
yeah.
to see how it works.
Yeah, they wanted to without interrupting anything or giving too much away because they were on 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
It was weird. It was weird. But we came and we did our little 3 or 4 hours and kind of got to know each other.
Yeah.
And then they hired us, and so we both moved.
Did you hit it off from the get-go like that? Yeah.
Yeah. It was really weird. It was really weird. It was just like, yeah, we think the same to a degree, but we're alike but different enough, and our sense of humor was the same.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was kind of nice. That was interesting because working with John was great. We got along fantastic. And actually, his dad was one of the partners that I worked with when we bought the radio stations. As it turned out, I moved out to Hastings, and John moved to Kansas City. But I went with his dad and these other group of people to buy those stations. So it was kind of crazy at that time. But yeah, I've been really fortunate who I've worked with.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pat and I got along really well. One of the first things we found out is our birthdays are practically on the same day.
Which was, yours was on Sunday and Pat's was on Monday, right? Yes.
Yeah. But other things too. We grew up very similarly. He was in small town. I was in small town. He'd only been in radio his entire life. He started with a famous radio show here in Omaha, which was Rocket in the Morning. And he was his producer. That's how he started. So our starts were the same. And our evolution was very, very similar.
Yeah. What about the dynamic between you two resonated with the audience?
I think a big part of it, you got to be able to make fun of yourself and be vulnerable and not be shy. But also our roles were kind of reversed. Pat was more like, we always joked, he was more like the mom. And he likes Bravo TV shows. He likes, it's just kind of funny because his tastes and the things that he's attracted to, or he likes to talk about. He loved The Bachelorette. All this, and I was not. That wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
I was more do-it-yourself kind of stuff. Rodeos, NASCAR. Those were my interests, and so we were kind of on the opposite side. But the interesting part is we found that a lot of our audience also was the same way, not the stereotype that everybody thinks everybody should be.
Yeah.
That the women should like these things and men should like these things. I liked all kinds of sports, and he likes, no doubt he likes sports, but he likes talking about other things that typically aren't on the same guy's list.
Yes.
At least not stereotypically.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that. I think more people kind of resonated with that because it's like, yeah, I'm the same way. I'm not Susie Homemaker, and not to put down anybody that stays home and takes care of the kids, because God knows you need those people.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my thing, and I'm not good at it. But that's where those stereotypes come in. Is there really a Susie Homemaker? Well, there's probably a few.
Yeah.
But then again, like we know some people that we work with, maybe somebody would be surprised to find out she loves to knit. What? You're like, that's not how I see you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so people kind of make assumptions about who people are. And I think it was just that we were different. Most morning shows to that point, I'd noticed also a lot of the women that were in radio didn't get the opportunity to have that number one role. And most of the time they were either read the news or they did the weather. That was all they did. So your most famous radio shows didn't necessarily include a female in a position of authority.
Did you appreciate that when you were in the position of authority?
Yeah, because it was that way with John. I've, like I said, been very I worked at the Eagle for a short time. Neil Hunter was my co-host, and he was another one that was all about elevating the amount of participation that I had in the show and the direction. So that made a big difference because it took away any, what do I want to say? I was not intimidated. I wasn't afraid to speak my mind. They made it that way, but they had to make it that way because there's plenty of situations I've heard about them. I've personally never been in it. I've never felt like, except for maybe once or twice, I guess. But I wasn't afraid to speak my mind and say, nah, this isn't happening because I know it can be the other way. So yeah, there was still some of that. A little sexism.
Okay. Do you have an example that you're willing to share?
Yeah, it gets my blood boiling when I think about it. But I had a boss at one time who chose to berate me and my experience level. Because I'd been in radio longer than he had. But in his mind, I didn't understand. There's no way you could understand the pressure that he was under because of where you come from and he meant experience-wise, meaning that as a woman, I didn't have that same experience. And he raised his voice at me to do that. And I was like, that's the only time I've ever had somebody do that in a work environment. I've never experienced that otherwise, to have somebody actually raise their voice at me.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure your initial reaction was pissed off. based on the tone
I was
of your voice.
stunned immediately. I was looking at him like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Who do you think you are? Which I think that's what I actually said. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm not staying here for it. And I left the room.
Okay.
I wasn't going to argue with him.
And then long-term working with him, how did you manage that?
He left. Because I told the right people what happened. And so, yeah, and he left.
Okay.
So that was because I didn't want it to be a thing. They didn't want it to be a thing.
Yeah.
They at first tried to make it okay. They tried to make us apologize to each other.
Yeah.
And I was like, no,
No.
I don't think I need to apologize.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how long did your and Pat's show run on air?
We were on from 2002 to 2018, through the end of 2018. We started at the beginning of 2002, so 16 years.
Yes, yeah, and you and Pat eventually broke off and started a podcasting business,
Yes.
which was acquired by Hurrdat in July.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
So we were 18 months.
Okay,
and
yes.
they acquired it. Yeah.
What's the backstory behind there?
The podcasting?
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple levels. We both were involved in podcasting. We both were interested in podcasting. And it's been around, like 10, 15 years, probably on people's radars the last, say, 5 to 10 years. But some form of podcast. I think the very first podcaster, I can't remember who it was, but I know it was like in 2002 or 2003. I know who it is, but the name's evading me. But anyway, so there'd been some interest in it, and radio hadn't turned that corner yet to take advantage of it. They were to some degree, like they'd repackage a show and then call it a podcast. And it really is not the same thing.
Yes, sort of counts, but
yeah, kind of. Yeah. So when we decided to do this, we had choices. It was like, okay, we're not going to be working at this radio station anymore. Do we want to continue working in radio? We had options. We had offers. Do we want to move? Our families are here, and we have name recognition here. And if we can use that for the good, maybe we should do something like that. So how can we take advantage of that? It was really a business decision more than anything. It's like, what really makes sense? And so we decided to.
And what happened at the end of the radio show? How did that end?
We got let go.
Okay.
Yeah, we got let go. They didn't renew us.
Okay.
They didn't want to call it. We weren't fired. We just didn't get re-signed.
Okay. Classic. Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So the last 3 months we were there, we were still under contract. And so they required us to come in 5 days a week to record a 10-minute podcast. We didn't know anybody else was going to hear it. We didn't think any of them would see the light of day. And so we had to come in every day, though. We couldn't do it from home. We couldn't do 5 on Monday and here's our work. They still wanted us to come in every day. And part of that, I think, was, I don't know. Part of that was probably because if we didn't come in, if we didn't do it, then they didn't need to continue paying us. So they wouldn't have to pay out the contract.
Yeah. Okay.
So whatever, so we did. And so that honestly helped us make this decision because we were doing a podcast every day and we're like, we could just keep doing this and see what we can do. And we can produce, we have all the equipment. Basically, between the two of us, we had everything we needed.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. We talked to a really good friend of ours, and he used to be on our radio show, and he's a lawyer here in town, and we just stopped in his office one day, and we're just sitting in his conference room, batting around ideas, and mentioned that, and he's like, I want a podcast. I would love to have, and you know what? My business needs one. Oh, that's a whole new, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Businesses need them. So that was kind of where things took a turn. And that was like in November, December. So we got our LLC ready to go. So January 1, 2019, we're ready to go.
Okay. And then did that lawyer become the first client?
Yeah. And then he also was our landlord for the first 8 months. He gave us space to work out of. And seriously, everything fell in place. It's kind of like whatever it was that we were needing, that person seemed to walk in the door. Neither one of us, yes, I was part owner of a radio station, but I didn't start the business. We had a businessman who was one of the owners also that ran the station. I just did whatever needed to be done. So neither one of us had ever started a business. Had to learn QuickBooks. Had to learn our way around LegalZoom. We were kind of figuring things out as we went, and then somebody would walk in the door that had a background in that, and they needed help with their podcast, so we would do a little trade.
Okay.
And that's how it just kept happening. People from our past showed up, and it was at the opportune moment. and would help us with SEO, helping us work, to do better with our new website that we had to develop. It was just so much stuff that we didn't know. And those people it just was weird. If you put it out there and pay attention, usually it shows up.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge that was unique to starting that business?
What was probably promoting it and going out actively to find customers. It was okay, how do we do this? How do we get in front of people? How do we can tell people we can do our podcast, but if people aren't listening to our podcast, they aren't going to know about us. And then we got fortunate, I guess, really is because a local writer for the newspaper wanted to do a follow-up on us being let go, which was a godsend. And so that coincided with the launch of our podcast. And that was our podcast launch 6 weeks after we started the company. And they put an article out on our new production company.
Yeah.
Which gave us a lot of advertising.
Yes.
Right
I
then.
can believe it.
And then we met, again, then somebody else walked in the door and they introduced us to someone else. And next thing you know, we're doing a presentation at a Chamber of Commerce or at a Rotary or with the American Marketing Association and getting in front of business leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And that was how things really started rolling.
Was there any difference in the medium of podcasting compared to radio? Or was it the same as soon as you hit record? The banter was the same?
Yeah, and for us, I guess it is. The fortunate thing is when we were doing radio, the difference, let's start there. The difference is we don't have to stop for commercials.
Okay.
And we didn't have to form our breaks. Like you have 4 breaks an hour and we're on for 4 hours. So we'd have 16 breaks and we knew that the one was an open, then we knew this one was going to be a close. So we need to fill the other 14. We knew we had a segment on Hollywood that played once an hour. So now we only had to take out 10. So we got 10 left. Okay, of those 10, we knew this is going to be a news break every hour. So now we've got 6. And once you started breaking that down, you really didn't have a lot of time to just talk about things. And that was the thing that most people liked the most about our show was just banter. Was it just like talking about stuff? So the podcast was like the best of Pat and JT without the news, without the, oh my God, the commercials, yes, without the requirements that we had to go through with radio. You could just talk about anything. And now we can do it and talk for 20, 25 minutes.
Or 45.
Or an hour. Or some of our podcasters are doing 2 hours. You just don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But they can follow the conversation. So like for us, talking for 20 to 30 minutes, that's probably more than we actually got to talk on the radio over 4 hours, just about stuff and just have some fun. And so our podcast is very much like our radio show, though, because we very rarely talk about politics. We try and just talk about stuff in our own life. And I think that was another thing, too, is like there's plenty of places you can hear about politics.
Yeah.
You don't need to hear about mine, and every once in a while, I think people kind of know where we stand, but we're not trying to change minds. We're just talking about the dumb stuff that happens to us every day.
Yes, yeah. And then did you have, as far as growing that podcast audience, once you had that initial lift from that World Herald article, has it just been steady ever since? And when it's quality content, people end up telling their friends about it. Yeah. Any additional insights besides those
Ours,
two?
we did get a big bump because of the newspaper, and we knew that it was going to spike and it was going to come back, and then it was going to settle, and then it would find its groove. And it stayed steady ever since. I think we've done almost 600 episodes now. Because we were doing one every day for the first year.
7 days a week.
7 days a week. So we did 365 the first year, and then most of the next year we kept doing that, and then we finally backed it to 5 days a week.
Okay.
And we had sponsors that jumped on with us, which was like, wow, I was honored. I was like, thank you, because we didn't think about having a sponsor for our podcast. We just used our podcast to promote the business.
Yeah.
and then realized all of a sudden, you know what? We're kind of silly because Pat and JT work for us. And if Pat and JT worked for anybody else, they would use them. They would put them out there. Yeah. They would make them promote. And we aren't using them. We need to use them. And so when we had that first sponsor want to get on board, it's like, that's that's awesome. So now we can actually start promoting for advertisers as well. And then we started looking for other podcasts that were talent as opposed to businesses. So it might be people that already had a podcast, or as it turned out, we had a friend of ours who ended up leaving radio, and he's a sports broadcaster, and convinced him, it's like, you can make a living at this, and we can help you with this. And that's what we really wanted to do, is to help businesses find another way to meet their clients, and to help other podcasters turn this into at least a lucrative hobby.
Yes,
if we could.
And then the acquisition by Hurrdat just kind of rounding I guess the corner on the end of the story. So Hurrdat acquired Parkville in July, and what I guess, how did that happen?
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah.
That was the owner of Hurrdat. So it was Bill and Chris, top two guys in the company. They were invited to be on a podcast by one of our clients. The client is a local bank, and they were doing a podcast series on entrepreneurs. And so they had them come in, and as it turned out, these guys were looking for a way to incorporate podcasting into their media agency. They had print, they did film, but they didn't have that audio element, and they wanted to find a way to do it. And so they were actually in the process of trying to figure out a way to build it from the ground up. And then they came in for their podcast, and then they left, and apparently the conversation was something along the lines of, that's what we need. Do you think they would be interested? And so they approached us and asked if we would be interested in being acquired. And we about fell out of our chair, because we're like, excuse me, you want to buy this? This is what? And then we got to talking about what their long-term goals are and what ours are. And they were like parallel. Our difference was resources. We were just going to take longer to get there. And they had resources, but they didn't have the equipment and the history and the experience to figure out how to get there. So put the two together, and it's been wildfire ever since.
Yes, yeah. So Jill, last question for you.
Okay.
If you were to go back and tell the radio or the rodeo queen Jill something, what advice would you give her?
Don't doubt yourself. Seriously, because at the time I remember I was really hesitant about that, because a lot of people looked at me sideways when I said I was going to broadcasting school. My parents were really wishing that I would get a real job the whole time I was working at the radio stations, because it wasn't hugely lucrative. I remember when I first started getting paid, because the first 6 months I worked for Glenn, I was an unpaid intern.
Wow.
And so I had to make a deal with mom and dad to help me out here. I had some funds from pageant proceeds,
yes,
but not like what I would need to really live. And so that was kind of it was a deal, and they trusted me to do it, and then it ended up paying off. So it was, at the time, I doubted myself a lot when I first started, because I was like, there's no way this can be real and be this much fun. It just can't be. It can't be that I can really love what I'm doing. And I always did. I always loved what I was doing, and I was so lucky. Because I think about a lot of people, they take that first job. My very first job was working in a department store in the toy department. And you start working for a company, and then you work your way up, right? And so maybe you take that first job not thinking, this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. You're just thinking you just got a job. And I think a lot of people end up in their career that way.
yes,
It's by accident. They just took that job, and that's where they end up staying. And maybe they really love doing something else, but they never found that job in that industry. And I can think of so many of my friends the same way.
Yeah.
They didn't realize that they could actually do this, and then you love coming to work every day.
yes, yeah. I have a bunch of friends in the same boat, that like a job turns into a career, and they didn't really pick their career.
Yeah.
They just took the job.
And it's hard to get out, because now you have experience, so you're valuable over here, but you want to go over there, but you don't know anything about it, so you'd be ground level,
yeah.
right? And it's hard to go backwards.
Yes.
So I guess that job, I think the only fortunate thing that came from that job was I knew I didn't want to keep doing that. And so that made the decision a little bit. And actually, I was doing that job right before I ran for the rodeo queen in the contest. Right before that, I saw it. It was in the break room, and the thing was up on the bulletin board. And I'm like, I can do that. That'd be way more fun than this.
Yeah.
I'm just like trying to find my way. And I was still going to college at that time too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would honestly, I wouldn't change anything. I would just want to just hang in there, trust your gut.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Jill, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely.
I'm very much looking forward to working together. It's
I
been
am too.
fun so far. So,
I'm
yes.
honestly, I'm just like overjoyed. I mean, seriously, and I've told others the same thing. You and Sasha. Honestly, it's like this is the best additions to our team, and everything moving forward. Everything, like we said, it's just been wildfire, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, same here. Jill's podcast is Pat and JT. You can find it on any podcast platform. We'll also drop the link in the description. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit subscribe and tell your friends about the show. We release episodes every Monday, so stay tuned for next week.